Thank you, Kirkwood. You know, if there was anybody that should have been identified, recognized, known, expected, anticipated, it should have been Jesus Christ. I mean, for 2,000 years, that's all the Hebrew nation had heard. There's one coming, there's one coming, there's one coming. And you get into the Old Testament, and you've got all of these specific prophecies. You know, every major Hebrew personality spoke about the one who was going to come. Every major prophet and every minor prophet spoke in some way, had some little inkling that God was sending someone, down to the very place where he would be born, Bethlehem. Isaiah even speaks of him being a Nazarene, when it speaks of the shoot that comes up out of Jesse. There is the perfect picture of the crucifixion in Psalm 22. There is the perfect picture of what Jesus Christ came to do in Isaiah 53. My star, you got angels popping in and popping out and showing up and speaking, and entire groups of angels that filled the night sky over Bethlehem. If anybody should have ever been anticipated, it should have been Jesus. And yet when Jesus Christ comes, he's the most misunderstood person that ever walked the face of the earth. And you see that no more clearly than you do in John chapter 7. I want you to take your copy of God's Word, and I want you to go with me to the 7th chapter of John. Now, if you're new here, if you're visiting here, in fact, I had 2 ladies from Montgomery who drove up this morning. There they are right there. That lady right there said it was like coming to see Elvis. I just want everybody to know that that was what was said of me. So here we go. Thank you very much. John chapter 7. I'm in a series entitled, Who is Jesus? The closer we get to Easter, you're going to watch. Magazine covers are going to discuss it. There are going to be documentaries on television. Even major cable news companies and the major network companies, they will all do something around this whole thing of Jesus, because people still misunderstand who is Jesus. And the whole of the 7th chapter of the Gospel of John just shows you how misunderstood he was. Now, every single one of us in this place knows what it is to feel misunderstood. Somebody misunderstood me. Somebody misunderstands me. So I want you to watch. I'm just going to begin to take you through, and then I'm going to come back. I want to show you 2 things that Jesus does in the midst of this whole misunderstanding. When you begin chapter 7, you begin in verse 3 with the brothers of Jesus. Now that's kind of fascinating. He had 4 brothers. The brother that was nearest to him evidently was James. You read his little epistle near the end of the New Testament. He became also the head of the church in Jerusalem. He had a brother, his second brother was named Judas. Can you imagine that? He had a brother named Judas. We call him Jude. It's the little small epistle that is right before the book of Revelation. That was written by the half-brother of Jesus Christ. He had a brother by the name of Joseph and a brother by the name of Simon. Isn't that funny? Simon Peter, but Jesus had a brother by the name of Simon. And he had at least 2 sisters, because there is a reference to the fact that they say his sisters, plural, are here. So he had at least 2, maybe more, I don't know. But when you come to John chapter 7, you see his closest relatives mocking him. Listen to what they say. Chapter 7 of John, verse 3, therefore his brothers said to him, leave here and go into Judea. You ought to get out of here. This is the backwoods. Go down to Judea. Go down where it's happening. Go to the capital. Go to the big city. Leave here and go into Judea so your disciples also may see your works which you're doing. Nobody's going to see you here. Nobody's going to know you here. For no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. Hey, Jesus, we know what you want. You want everybody to know you. We know that you want to be popular, that you want to be a public figure. You can't do it here in Galilee. Get on down there to Jerusalem. Your disciples will see you there. They'll see you there. You'll be known. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. Now, I want to tell you that really reminds me briefly what Satan did in the temptation with Jesus when he said, throw yourself off the pinnacle of the temple and the angels will catch you. He will not allow you to dash your foot against a rock. His brothers come to him and basically say the same thing Satan says to him. Go ahead, make a big public display. Be a big public spectacle for everybody. Now, they were mocking him because they misunderstood him. You say, well, how do you know that? Well, look at the next verse. They did not believe him. Even his brothers were not believing in him. So you got those that are closest to him who misunderstand who he is. Look down to verse 12. You've got this grumbling crowd here who are the ill-informed. You know, I hear a little something over here. I hear a little something over here. And I come away like I'm an expert on what's being said. I'm an expert on this situation. So here they are. They're the grumbling misinformed. And look at what they say. They misunderstanding. Some were saying he's a good man. Well, he's a good man. And then the others come back, well, no, he is not. You know, and we're speaking from authority here. This is the crowd of the grumbling misinformed. And they misunderstand who Jesus is. Then you have got the whining dissatisfied. There are people that are just constantly whining about all of this. Look at verse 15. The Jews were astonished, saying, how did this man come to be learned? He didn't go to the university here. He didn't go to the school we went to. He doesn't have an education, does he? Then they come down. Look at this in verse 20. They come to him and they say, you've got a demon. That's who you are. Who is Jesus? You've got a demon. You're a devil. Nobody is seeking to kill you. Because at this point in time, it was being said they're seeking to kill him. And so you've got this group that just whine. Nobody's looking to kill you. You don't know what you're talking about. Look down at verse 25. Look at how they switch. Now, this is so typical of the crowd. So some of the people of Jerusalem were saying, is not this the man that they're seeking to kill? So one minute they're whining that nobody's going to kill you. The next minute they're looking over here and they're whining, well, isn't this the guy they're looking to kill? And they just whine through this whole chapter. Then you come down to the seething elite who detested him and who wanted to take his life. The religious leadership. Look at verse 32. The Pharisees heard the crowd muttering. They could hear all of this muttering that was going on, all of this misunderstanding, all of this misinformation about him. And the chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to seize him. They send out guards, they send out soldiers to go and get Jesus and to arrest him. Now, have you ever been misunderstood? What do you do when you are misunderstood? I can tell you what you do. You get frustrated. What is more frustrating than to be in a crowd of people? What's more humiliating than to be in a crowd of people and you say something and somebody is offended and they have misunderstood what you're saying? Well, no. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I meant. Don't be upset. Don't get offended. And then you try to explain yourself. And when you try to explain yourself, you get more frustrated. And they get more frustrated at you and they misunderstand to a greater degree. Well, that's not what you said at all. Well, yes, it is what I said. This is what I meant. Well, that's not what you meant. Have you ever gotten into a conversation with somebody on email? Email you think is great. Oh, man, I am convinced. I think it's out of hell. Have you ever gotten into a disagreement with somebody on email? I never, ever, let me say this. To the best of my ability, I try never, ever to get into a cross conversation with somebody on email. They can't see your heart. They can't see your face. They can't tell your reaction. You say things to them and they can't see you and they take it one way and they misunderstand what you said and you write back and try to correct it and then it goes even further. What do you do when that happens? You get mad. You get angry. And what do you do when you get angry? Well, you either explode at them, but this is usually what we do when somebody misunderstands us. I cut off communication and then I cut off contact. I'm not going to be around. I'm not going to say anything else. I'm not even going to be around you. I've watched that happen in Baptist churches now for 61 years. I've seen that go on. Somebody said something in a class, they were misunderstood, and what they did was they withdrew, they cut off communication, and then they just cut out, I'll just go to another class. I'll just go to another church. I'll just go somewhere else. It happens in marriage. In marriage, where one marriage partner misunderstands something that was said by the other. And what will we do there? We just cut off communication and we kind of withdraw behind this invisible wall, and we become like shadows moving through the house. Those things that never say anything and they never interact with anybody else. Jesus was misunderstood. It hurts. It hurts. If you're going to ever have any interaction with other people, let me tell you something, you're going to be misunderstood at some time. Every single Sunday that I get into a pulpit, I know that somebody at some point is going to misunderstand something I say. And yet, the fact of the matter is, I cannot not do what God has called me to do. So when you come to John chapter 7, in the midst of this colossal misunderstanding, Jesus Christ never allows anything to co-opt the Father's mission for his life. You can't either. We can't as a church. There is no time in American history where Christianity has been more misunderstood. So what do? Just retreat in here behind the walls and never open our mouth? You cannot allow Satan that victory. Jesus never allows misunderstanding to co-opt the Father's mission for his life. Why do a lot of us never share with anybody else? Well, I'm not about to share Jesus Christ with them. They'll misunderstand me. And what has happened? Satan's got a victory. Satan's got a victory. Because I am more fearful of being embarrassed than I am being committed to do what Christ has called me to do. Now, I want you to see that. That's what I want you to see in this text. I'm going to take you just to 2 verses this morning. And I want you to see, what does Jesus do in the midst of misunderstanding? Does he withdraw? No. Does he cut off his communication? No. Does he just, stifle up? No. Does he just shut up? No. He doesn't do any of that. You're going to see what Jesus does in the midst of misunderstanding. He will not stop the mission the Father has sent him on. So let me just give you 2 points. Number 1, in the midst of misunderstanding, Jesus Christ issues an invitation. Of all things, he's telling all these people who misunderstanding, come to me. Come to me. Don't go to Anderson Cooper. Don't go to Fox News. Don't go to this person over there or that person over there. Go to Jesus. Go to Christ. That's the invitation that he gives. I want you to watch this. Now, in order to do this justice, I've got to give you a little explanation of what's going on. So go with me back to verse 1 of chapter 7. If you're there, in chapter 5, Jesus was in Jerusalem. Chapter 6, he's now in Galilee. Chapter 7, he's in Galilee and about to go back to Jerusalem. 6 months has passed. You can kind of look at chapter 6 and just know 6 months has taken place, and Jesus is going to head back to Jerusalem because verse 2 tells us the feast of the Jews, the feast of booths, was near. Now, the Jews had a number of feasts, and for about 3 of them, it was required for Jews to go to Jerusalem. They had to go down to Jerusalem. One was Passover. One was this feast, the Feast of Booths, and according to Josephus, the Feast of Booths was the most exciting, anticipated, and loved feast that the Jews had. And I can tell you why. It was one great big camping trip. Now, you can go back this afternoon and you can look in Leviticus chapter 23, and toward the end of the chapter 23, you'll read where this whole festival and feast was set up and what God said about it. And what he said was this: all of the Jews are to come together in Jerusalem, and they are to sleep in booths. Sometimes you'll hear it called tabernacles, but let me tell you what it actually is. It's a lean-to. they would build lean-tos. Every daddy would take his family down to Jerusalem, and along the way, they would pick up these branches off of myrtle trees and cypress trees and cedar trees and palm branches, and he would get into Jerusalem or somewhere around Jerusalem, and he would build a little lean-to, and every night, all the family would tuck in under the lean-to, camping out. Wasn't that fun? Do y'all remember doing that when you were kids? Just camping out. Dad's there, and here's Dad, and this is what he's doing. He's sharing with all these kids all the things that happened to the Hebrews while they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. It was to relive, it was to recall, it was to remember what those Hebrews had gone through. And so Daddy's there. You can just see him out there, head sticking out of the lean-to, looking up at the stars. All the kids, they're sitting there next to him, and he's telling them, oh, let me tell you, when they came up out of the Red Sea, they walked for 3 days, and they were so thirsty, and they didn't have any water, and it was not available to them. And they got to a place of water, and they tasted it, and it was bitter. And he just goes through the story. You know the story of the water of Marah. And so he tells them the story. Now, that's what dads would do in the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles. It was just a big camping trip. Everybody was cooking out. Everybody's camping. And every single morning, all the family would get up because the priests would come out of the temple, and they would go down off of Moriah over to the hilltop of Zion. Mount Zion is here, and Moriah is right here. Moriah is a little taller. Mount Zion is right here. This was the mountain of David. This was the city of David. Remember, he goes and he buys the threshing floor of Araunah up here at the end of his life. He buys it because he has sinned against God and he wants to sacrifice. Well, that's where Mount Moriah is gonna come into this whole collection there, the city of Jerusalem. And so, but David lives over here, and he lives in a palace. And as you trail down this hill, on the back of this hill, at the bottom of the hill is a spring called the Springs of Gihon. Gihon means to bubble up. And there's a big pool there, and the pool there is the pool of Siloam. And so every single morning during the Feast of Booths, the priests will come out with silver pitchers, and they will walk down the mountain, down from Mount Moriah over to Mount Zion, down that mountain to the bottom down there to the pool of Gihon, and all the people would follow them. And they're singing, just like we've been singing. They were singing, and they sing the Hallel, Psalm 113 through 118. So they're singing that, and as they make their way back up to the temple, go back up that spiny, rocky mountain there to the top of Mount Zion, and then you just walk over and climb up to the Temple Mount at Mount Moriah. You've got the southern steps, and there the people would line up on either side, and they would hold their palm branches out, and the priests would all go under and into. They're just having a good time. They're just having a big celebration. And the priest would go into the temple area, and with that silver pitcher of water, he would walk one time around the great altar, and he would come back, and there to the cheers of the people, he would pour the water out at the base of the altar, and it would splash out there. And it was a memory. Do you remember when God brought water out of a rock? That's what they were remembering. And so they would go back and they would cheer and they would have a great day, and then they would go cook hot dogs and they just have a big time, and it's a lot of fun. But on the last day, something different happened. On the last day, the priest would come out of the temple with a golden pitcher. He would go down just as he had the other days to the pool of Siloam. He would get a pitcher full of water, and he would come back up to the temple and to the great altar, and he would walk around the great altar 7 times that day. Why did he do that? Jericho. Joshua threw a fit at Jericho, right? He fit the battle at Jericho. He threw a fit down there at Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. And so 7 times he would march around the great altar, and then he would climb the ramp up to the top of the altar. And there at the very top, he would lift that pitcher up higher. And all of a sudden, as he did this, a hush fell over the entire place. The people waited in anticipation of him pouring that water out, and them cheering. But while he lifted it up and lifted it up and lifted it up, the people stood there in silence. And in that moment, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Now, can you imagine that? In the middle of the Alabama State Fair, everybody goes quiet. Everybody's attention is riveted to this golden pitcher of water. And just as the priest begins to pour it out, Jesus cries, if any man is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. It's an invitation. Come to me and drink. Are you thirsty, is what he's saying. And the fact of the matter is, everybody gets thirsty. You know what it's like to be thirsty. You know what it's like to cut grass in July and August in Birmingham, Alabama, and you're hot and you're sweating and you're itchy because the grass has gotten all over you, and you come to the back door and your wife said, you take it off before you get in here. And you're saying, I gotta have something to drink. Gotta have something. I'm parched. I'm dry. I think I'm gonna die. Get me something to drink. Give me a drink of water. Bring me a glass of water. I don't care. Don't even put any ice in it. Just bring me some water. Have you ever been that thirsty? Do you know what it is to be parched and really dying for a drink of water? Are y'all thirsty right now? The thirst that Jesus is talking about is not physical thirst. Do you know that you are made up? I read different things. 70 to 80% of your body. You know what you are? You're a walking water balloon is what you are. We're made up primarily of water. We have to have water. Listen, let me tell you, it is perhaps the single greatest drive you have. Maybe other than holding your nose in your mouth and not letting you breathe, the drive for water is perhaps the greatest drive that you have. It's greater than to drive. You may be starving, but let me tell you, if you're starving for water, you don't even think about food. You don't even think about the sex drive. You don't think about hot. You don't think about cold. You don't think about clothing or shelter. Perhaps the greatest drive outside of just catching a breath is getting some water, because you can't live more than 3 to 6 days without water. Now, as a pastor, I've seen a lot of people die. I can remember a pastor in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He had been the former pastor of the church that I pastored years and years and years and years earlier, and they took him off of all of the liquids and all the food, and he was dying. And I'll never forget walking in and seeing that pastor there. And I wanted so badly just to wet a washcloth and put it in his mouth, but they wouldn't let me do it. His tongue had swollen up. His lips were swollen and cracked. The inside of his mouth was cracked. His organs, they tell me, the internal organs, when you can't get water, they begin to shrivel up. You begin to be incoherent. You start hallucinating. You start talking to people that are not there. You start talking out of your mind. But when Jesus comes and he says, are you thirsty? He's talking about a spiritual thirst. Because just as you can dry up physically, you can dry up spiritually. In fact, if you look back to chapter 5 of John, it's exactly what is being said when Jesus comes, of all places, to the pool of Bethesda. He's walking around the pool of Bethesda and he sees this multitude that's there. And listen, it says they were sick. It's a sign of where they were spiritually. They were blind spiritually. They were lame spiritually. And look at the text. They were withered spiritually, because they had no spiritual water. They were not drinking from the things that they should be drinking from. They were drinking from everything else. Let me tell you, we have thirsts of all kind, and we get this confused. We think our spiritual thirst is a thirst for something else. We thirst for power. We thirst for recognition. We thirst for popularity. We thirst for reputation. We thirst for money. We thirst for ease. We thirst for comfort. We thirst for all kind of stuff. And yet all of that never satisfies the thirst. Let me show you this. Put your finger there in John chapter 6, or John chapter 7. Go with me to Ecclesiastes. Now, if you don't know where Ecclesiastes is, go to Psalms, go to the right, past Proverbs, and then you come to Ecclesiastes. And listen to what Solomon says. Now, I'm just going to share this chapter with you because this is Solomon. Solomon was he was hungry. He was thirsty for something. He was looking for something. Listen to what he says. Solomon writes this, I said to myself, verse 1 of chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes, I'll test you with pleasure. He says, I'm going to give myself to pleasure. Whatever pleasures me, that's what I'm going to give myself. I'm going to go drink at the fountain of pleasure, and I'll be satisfied, but he was not. Watch. So enjoy yourself. Go knock yourself out. Just go find whatever it is you find that you want to do, just go do it. Just enjoy yourself. And behold, it was futility. I couldn't satisfy myself. It wasn't that enjoyable. I did everything that I thought I wanted to do, but it just wasn't that fun. Verse 2, I said of laughter, it's madness. I went to every comedy club in L.A. I watched the Comedy Channel 24 hours a day. I laughed and I heard this joke and that joke, and I saw this thing and that thing, but I walked away from that and I was still just as empty. Verse 3, I explored my mind, how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was still guiding me wisely, how I could take hold of folly and I could see what good there is in the sons of men to do under heaven the few years of their lives. He says, listen, I tried to get myself just on the border of being buzzed, where I had a good buzz going on, but I still had enough sense not to act like a fool. But he said, I just could never find any fulfillment in that. Woo! What a word for the day. What a word for the day. He comes, listen, what he says, I enlarged my works. He said, I started going to work early and staying at work later. I built houses for myself. I had vacation homes that had vacation homes attached to them. I had house after house. I planted vineyards. I planted gardens. I planted parks. I did trees. I made ponds. I got out there and dug in the yard. What fun is that? None for me. My daddy made me do it until I won't do it now. But anyway, that's another story. I bought male and female slaves. He says, listen, I thought if I owned somebody and I could manipulate them and make them do what I wanted them to do, that would bring satisfaction. I prospered. I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Man, I had the reputation. I was known to be the wealthiest guy that had ever existed in this part of the world. I had stocks and bonds like you can't imagine. I collected for myself silver and gold, the treasure of kings, all of that. He says, I did it all. Now watch this, verse 10, all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold from my heart any pleasure. I drank at every single fountain that was available. I went there, I opened my mouth wide. I said, let me have it. And I walked away and I said, I'm still thirsty. Wow. I considered all my activities, all that my hands had done, the labor which I'd exerted, is all vanity, nothing. Striving after the wind, like chasing the wind. It meant nothing to me. Let me tell you something. That's a lot. That's a lot of where we are today. We're thirsty, and we run after everything that there is out there that says, hey, come and drink from me, come and drink from me, and we walk away from it, and we think to ourselves, I'm still thirsty. Now listen to what Jesus says. Here's the invitation. Come to me and drink. Don't run off to that thing or this thing or the other thing. Come to me and drink. He who is thirsty, are you thirsty? Are you thirsty spiritually? Have you shriveled up? Are you parched? Are you dry spiritually? Come to me and drink. Listen, come to me and drink. Now, you can be 3 days without water. I can take you out here to the Cahaba, stand you up to your neck in the Cahaba River, but if you don't bend your head down and open your mouth and take a drink out of it, you're going to die of thirst. We can bring you into the church and take you to church activities and take you to this thing and that thing and the other thing. Listen, it's not coming into church that's going to satisfy the thirst. It is Jesus Christ that satisfies the thirst. It's not being in here that's going, You can walk in here dissatisfied, walk out dissatisfied. But let me tell you something. You've got to drink. You got to drink. I love C.S. Lewis. You want to read your kids something, read them C.S. Lewis's the Tales of Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia. There's a book in C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia called The Silver Chair. And in that is a little girl by the name of Jill. And Jill is out walking through the woods one day when she comes up on this, the lion, Aslan. And it terrifies her, and she runs away. She runs through the woods as hard as she can, as fast as she can to get away until she just falls in exhaustion. And as she falls down in exhaustion, she hears something. And what she hears is this babbling brook, and she thinks to herself, I am so thirsty, I need something to drink. And so she walks out and she sees the babbling brook, and as she's dying for a drink, she looks up and she sees the lion standing there. Now listen to the conversation. Are you not thirsty? Said the lion. I'm dying of thirst, said Jill. Then drink, said the lion. May I? Could I? Would you mind going away? Well, I do, said Jill. The lion answered this only by a look and a very low growl. As Jill gazed at its motionless bulk, she realized she might as well have asked the entire mountain to move for her convenience. The delicious, rippling noise of the stream was driving her nearly frantic. Will you promise not to do anything to me if I do come? Said Jill. I make no promises, said the lion. Jill was so thirsty now that without noticing it, she had come a step closer. Do you eat little girls? She asked. I have swallowed up girls and boys and men and women and kings and emperors and cities and realms, said the lion. I dare not drink, said Jill. Then you will die of thirst, said the lion. Oh dear. Coming another step closer, I suppose I must go and look for another stream, she said. There is no other stream, said the lion. Isn't that good stuff? Huh? And some of y'all wanted to sit home and watch TV. Man, listen to Lewis. That's just good stuff. There is no other stream. Never occurred to Jill to disbelieve the lion. Her mind suddenly made itself up. She went forward to the stream. She knelt down and she began to scoop up water in her hand. It was the coldest, most refreshing water she had ever tasted. Now, some of you all are desperate for a spiritual drink. Some of you are dry spiritually. Some of you down on the inside are wrestling right now. What do I do? What do I do? If I take a drink of Jesus, what will he do to me? That's what Jill asked the lion. What will he do to me? What will happen to me? Well, I can tell you what will happen if you don't. There is no other stream. If you're spiritually thirsty, you've got to come to Jesus. Let me show you the second thing, and I'll be quick about this. Here's the second thing. That's the invitation. In the midst of misunderstanding, somebody's going to misunderstand me. Jesus said, I can't help it. I'm here to give an invitation. Anyone who's thirsty, come to me. Now watch this. In the midst of misunderstanding, Christ reveals his intention. What is he going to do? What will he do to me? If I come to Jesus and drink, what is he going to do to me? Look at what he says in verse 38. He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. That's what he's going to do. That's what happens. That when you come to Jesus Christ, do you know what happens? You get blessed. It's a blessing. He says, I want to bless you. He says, out of you, I want there to flow rivers of living water. He says, you come to me and drink, and what you're going to discover is that I'm going to bless your life. Now, all of us sit here and say, oh, yeah, yep, that's what I want. I want the blessings of God. Lord, bless my life, bless my life, bless my life. And listen, we all have got different things that we're thinking of when we say, bless my life. But I want you to understand something. I want to talk to the Christians here. Why do we never, ever fully realize the blessings of God? Why do they seem to not be enough? Why is it that so many Christians come in and go out continuously dissatisfied, and they would say, yes, God has blessed me, but we don't say it in a way where we express, oh, God has so blessed me. Why? Because now I want you to listen to me carefully. The blessings of God are for you, but the blessings of God are not about you. They're not about you. Does God want to bless? Yes, He does. Will God bless? Yes, He does. Every one of y'all sitting here been blessed by God. You're living. You got up out the bed this morning. You're here. You're dressed. I think you all look like you're in your right mind. You know, God has blessed your life. Here's the problem. The problem is this, is that we take and receive the blessings of God and we become reservoirs. Pour it into me, pour it into me, pour it into me, and we never send it out. God never created you to be a reservoir to receive His blessing. He created you to be a channel through which He would send His blessings. It's not, oh God, just bless me, and I'm going to sit here in this room, and I'm just going to count my blessings, and I'm just going to hoard up my blessings, and I'm going to store up my blessings, and the blessings are all for me. And God says, no, you'll never experience the fullness of the blessing that I sent until the blessing that comes in you passes through you to someone else. Look at what the text says. Living waters. What is living water? Water that moves. Water that comes into a pool and then it passes out of a pool. That's living water. The whole of the Old Testament, the New Testament, when you read this word of living water, that's what it means. It means water is poured into something and water is flowing out of something. God never gives you His blessings for you to just sit on it. He gives you blessings in life so that they pass through you to everyone else. And let me tell you something. That's when life gets fun. Is that when you take what God has given you and you turn around and you begin to bless other people. And you say, well, what are you talking about? Well, let me give you an illustration of this. That will not cost you a red penny. Laurie Baker Jones, who is a great author, asked a guy by the name of Michael, can I put this in my book if I don't use the company and your last name? He said, absolutely. He said, in fact, let me tell my story. There was a young boy by the name of Michael whose dad was an abusive alcoholic. He abused the boy verbally. He abused the family verbally. He abused the boy physically. He abused the family physically. Michael said every day going home from school, he said, I would always stop at Jimmy's Cleaners. There was a guy named Jimmy. He had a cleaners. It was on Michael's way home. And he said, I would stop by there because Jimmy had a bowl of candy on his shelf. And he said, I'd walk into the door, reach over, pick me up a piece of candy, and leave. He said, but Jimmy would always say something to me. He'd always speak to me. He'd always say something. And you know, a little boy, when he's got a piece of candy, he's going to get on his way. He's got other stuff on his mind. But he said one day as he walked into the place, he said, Jimmy looked at him and he said, Michael, let me tell you something. You're going to grow up to be an important little boy. You're going to grow up to be an important man. In fact, one day you'll run a huge corporation. He says, I believe you will. I think that's what's going to happen to you. Michael said he took the candy and he got on out of the cleaners and went back down. But he said every day, he said, I'd stop now, not for the candy. I'd stop to hear what Jimmy was going to say about me. And he said, I'd listen to what Jimmy would say about me. And then I'd go home. And my dad would call me a dog or something worse that I can't say. And then he would begin to kick me. And if he could get his drunken hands on me, he would hit me and throw me down. Time went on. Michael grew up. And all because of what Jimmy had to say to him every day, just a word. Michael now runs a multi-million-dollar health care facility. Why? Because a man named Jimmy who knew Jesus took a blessing and blessed a little boy just with a word. Just with a word. Just with a word. Let's stand and pray about that.